Keep watching The Politics every Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time on New York Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Welcome to today's Foreign Policy Review. I'm Dustin Pickering, your host, and today we have Leo Hazal and Billy Bob and Carlo Parcelli with us today as co-hosts. I'm going to kick it off to Carlo and let him do a tedious rant as we open the show. So let's go with that, Carlo. Let's have a fun program today and enjoy listening to our conversation. Thank you guys for joining us. Subscribe to our channel. Remember that if you're watching today, subscribe. So Carlo, go for it.
The term for today is false consciousness. It's first cited by Friedrich Engels, and the meaning of it is very prescient now. A way of thinking that prevents a person from perceiving the true nature of their social or economic situation. And if any phrase defines the current hoi polloi, it's that one. It's led me back to thinking about Karl Kraus and his commentary on World War I, where he goes after the press vehemently because their descriptions of what was happening on the front were these glorified notions, these foggy, hazy ideas about the valor of war and how everyone was pulling together and the value of the nation state and the tradition and all of that, having nothing to do with the carnage that was out there, that was awaiting people. And I think it has a tremendous kind of connection with today's press. I think Kraus was very prescient in that regard. The lies that the Western press that they're willingly foisting on the general population, who by their ignorance, by their false consciousness, have absorbed and accepted. It's just outrageous. Billy Bob and I were talking about the frustrations of this week. Well, my frustrations are that I will comment, I will talk with people who have a point of view, supposedly, but frankly, I don't want to hear from people that don't have anything yet and persist in having nothing. I'll give you one example. I had a gentleman who wanted to point out to me about what a warmonger I was for supporting, theoretically supporting. Well, I do the liberation of Ukraine by Russia and all that went before it, all the history behind what's brought us to this point. And he had nothing. And then his point was that Putin, it's always Putin, it's never Russia, that Putin was aligning himself with neo-fascists, with Nazi elements around the world. Well, I said, that's not likely if you know anything about the Great Patriotic War, but let's hear. What groups are they? Well, he didn't have any. So I kept pressing him on it because he kept coming back at me, one insult after another, one ad hominem comment about my mother or whatever, these assholes do. And so finally I'd had enough, So I said, look, you either tell me who you're talking about. So he comes back with this vague notion of Hungarians. Well, I go, well, Hungary they're a member of NATO in the EU. They're loaded with fascists. There are fascists. So he's not content with that. He has to find an article where Orban, the president of Hungary, and Putin are shaking hands. And then there's the article. Well, right in the article, which I know he didn't read it, his article, God damn it, he didn't read his article. Right there in the second to the last paragraph, it says, however. This is the way the Western press works. They bury it way down. They bury the lead right down in the second. Izzy Stone pointed that out to us. right down in the second to the last paragraph that, of course, Hungary is a member of NATO and they're in the EU, so they're far more likely aligned, or they're far not likely, they are far more aligned with the West and the United States than they are with Putin. It's right there in his article that he was sending me to convince me that Putin was working with Nazis, which is one of the most fucking absurd things I've heard in the last, 6 or 7 minutes as I kibitz with these fucking assholes and their false consciousness. And I've had enough of it. If you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, don't fucking engage me. Just because I'm down on the killing floor with you doesn't mean I'm as ignorant as you are. I know things. Just because I don't talk to people above my pay grade doesn't mean that I don't know shit. And there's a few of us out there. And if you wanna talk to us, learn something first, please. Otherwise, just shut the fuck up. Let's get
Leo, that's a big problem, right? I mean, that is a tremendous problem in the West. You know, the media does not exist to inform people, and as a result, people think they're informed, and they're just really not. You know, it's frustrating.
Yeah, all the lies in the media is cruising on a momentum of 100 years of disinformation and ideological conditioning of the academies. I mean, I locate the very first bourgeois reactions to Marxism with the bifurcating of the academic discipline that used to be called political economy into economics and political science. And so the two should never meet. And that's the central part of Marxism, right? Is that the economy and material reality shapes consciousness. And so, like, from the get-go, that was in the late 19th century. From the get-go, there's a concerted, systematic effort to destroy Marxism, to marginalize it, to eradicate it from the academies. And then, of course, I don't know if you guys know Gabriel Rockhill. He has been doing a lot of work on deconstructing the French and German postmodern critical theory, and how that is that entire project has been a decades-long CIA effort to turn Western would-be vanguard leaders into anti-communist professors that endlessly abstract and obfuscate our problems we face in the world. So all these, current media lies is based on this very, very well-built foundation of false consciousness.
Yeah, Gabriel Rockhill is great. Like he seems right now to be, the cutting edge of the most necessary discourse in how he kind of has the number. He kind of he's the expert on what you just described. How the academia has been turned into a tool to, an anti-communist tool to create a culture that doesn't see, reality through the Marxist lens. And when we talk about the Marxist lens, I mean, we're talking about, basic fundamental reality and how material reality actually operates. And they want to, disconnect people's minds from actual existing reality. And these are, people are going to disagree with that assertion, right? And people are going to, and then, it's very frustrating. But yeah, Rockhill, I'm with you. Like, he's really on the cutting edge of that very, very necessary discourse and explaining what is going on, with the attempt to manufacture people's opinions in a way that, keeps them disconnected to reality.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
at the core of that is the effort by the Central Intelligence Agency to co-opt the arts in America and then to advertise it around the world.
Well, the arts and the academies, and I mean, academic theory, critical theory. You got French critical theory, you got German critical theory, and they've both been guided into an anti-communism and endless abstractioning, like Leo was saying.
to think about politics and to think about our world, to think about human society without Marxism is like doing biology without Darwinism, right? You can, you just get into all kinds of deviations and distortions and fantasies and delusions. Regularly, routinely, we see high-level, very accomplished thinkers, writers, just fumbling around in the dark and attributing the causation of the problems that we face to complete nonsensical scapegoats.
Well, let me ask, since we're on the topic, Leo, what do you think of Zizek?
I think he's one of these typical court intellectuals. I think he's a court jester / intellectual. I think he's very typical of all the Western leftists that get a big platform. They are often good at diagnosing and observing the problems in the imperial core in the West on a national level, but they are completely towing the ideological line on imperialism. And they often adhere to academic Marxism, Western academic Marxism, which is a lot of it is very much shaped by Trotskyism, and just basically the anti-communist left. I mean, he's very typical. Like they're all like that. Mark Fisher,
Chomsky
to a great extent, yes.
Do you have anything to add, Dustin? You want to jump in?
Well, I'm curious, where's the divergence between the Western communist critiques and then the authentic Marxist critiques?
Leo, you want to handle that? That's a good long question.
Where is the divergence? The divergence was in the Cold War, basically, or maybe even before. But in the Cold War, became very much pronounced. There was a concerted effort to turn Western Marxism, to turn the focus of Western Marxism to culture and to ephemera, to surface analysis. And I mean, that's where the term cultural Marxism comes from. It is important to talk about culture, of course. Of course, it's important to talk about that. But the Frankfurt School, the Situationists, the French theoreticians, all focus on culture rather than material reality. So Western Marxism categorically cuts out imperialism. Like that's just the big area which is blank, which is left out of the analysis. I mean, to a certain degree, I think it's very difficult for people who were born with indoor plumbing and refrigerators to understand the systemic structural effects of imperialism. Like people literally cannot imagine. I mean, I tell people that I was born without indoor toilet and without a fridge, without a TV, without a telephone, and people can hardly believe it. And this was in the early 80s. China was incredibly poor. I mean, we were even privileged. I come from a relatively privileged family of intellectuals, but people literally cannot fathom what that's like for 1 billion people. Just the structural underdevelopment and poverty. And of course, some liberal I was talking to was like, well, it's more healthy to to take a dump on a squat toilet. and she was like, it's better to cook your own food if you don't go to restaurants. Like, it's just like complete incomprehension.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned the Cold War being kind of where the divergent between the Western pseudo-leftists and authentic Marxism, separates. And I think there's a couple basic areas that they diverge. So Western faux Marxists, Western, fake leftists, they kind of they denounce Stalin. They're not supportive of the Soviet Union typically, and the same is true of China. Like modern China, they are dismissive of, and they call it capitalist, and same with Stalin. They just uphold all the anti-communist mythology of the Cold War. Stalin was a brutal dictator that murdered 20 million of his own people. So the fake Western left, upholds those narratives, and that those are some of the main contentions that we all, well, me and Leo, I know we engage with these kinds of people a lot on Facebook and stuff, in social media. And again, this is what, Rock Hill gets to. Like, why do we have this culture where so many people are growing up thinking that leftism isn't, is something other than it actually is? And they call themselves leftist. They embrace the leftist label, but their actual politics are very, very not to the left. And why is that? There's answers. There's answers for why that is.
Hannah Arendt, George Orwell, these thinkers that we've respected all our lives.
Yeah,
they did valuable work on many, many different subjects. But when it comes to the subject of creating a better world, to how do we move past these gross injustices, they have painted a picture of the actual process of creating a new world, the actual process of decolonization into a totalitarian, authoritarian scarecrow, a phantom that people have conjured, that any world leader who stands up and says, the resources of my country for my people, and we want to push the Western corporations out, immediately he's a dictator and a authoritarian tyrant.
And that's a very important point, because if you go back to Edward Bernays and his book Propaganda from 1928, the one thing that runs throughout that entire book is he's lying. It's all based on lies, and that's why it influenced the Nazis. So the bigger the lie, the big lie, tell the big lie. So now we have a situation in the world where there's a huge portion of the world, in fact, a majority, a simple majority, that's working on the practical level that Marxism reflects, that it demands. It's not operating out of these kind of false principles, these kind of platitudes and bromides that used to go along with flush toilets and and refrigerators that accompany that sort of thing, that refrigerators are used as props for, and that's a huge change that's happening now, and that brings us to the West's hostility toward Russia, and in a stronger economic sense, almost a pure economic sense, toward China, and I think there's something going on. There's something going on here that people aren't. It's the bromides aren't working anymore.
So Leo touched on the paradigm. So instead of the paradigm being working class governance and overthrowing the capitalist class governance and replacing it with a working class government, these Western leftists have created a new paradigm where it's democracy against authoritarianism, and the West is a democracy. Everybody that they want to overthrow and whatever country we want to take the resources from and exploit the labor from. They're authoritarian, and we're just trying to bring them democracy. So this whole way of thinking, all the kids today are growing up thinking about dictatorship versus democracy. That's their, and they're on the side of dictatorship, or they're on the side of democracy, which makes them a leftist. And because of that, they're against the authoritarians that the imperialists have decided, hey, they're authoritarian because they have things we want. So that's the, Hannah Arendt and all those people that Leo just listed, they're people that have created this false paradigm, this false tug of war between democracies and authoritarians. It's a whole cultural, understanding that everybody is bought into, and it's entirely unthreatening to the status quo. It is never in 1,000 years gonna threaten the status quo, and that's why it's promoted. That's why they like it. But that does get us to like Russia and China, and why the U.S. is happy to engage in this paradigm of democracy versus authoritarian. And hey, guys, China and Russia, they're authoritarian, and we have to overthrow their government, and et cetera, et cetera.
Do any of you three feel that people like Hannah Arendt and George Orwell came by this dichotomy honestly?
Well, I mean, they probably believed what they were saying, but they were paid to do so as well. I mean, they were all receiving paychecks from subsidiaries like the Hydra-headed academic industrial complex, academic military industrial complex, which the CIA massively funded. I mean, just thinking about how much money the U.S. military spends, right, on actual wars against anti-imperialist countries, against countries that want actual democracy, that want actual independence and sovereignty. We can expect that they spend no less money and resources and energy on propaganda. I mean, the Cold War, I mean, how much money, resources was poured into the nuclear arms race, which the U.S. initiated against Russia. The same amount. I mean, just by pure simple logic. I mean, it's much easier actually to fund these hearts and minds operations over decades. So Hannah Arendt and George Orwell, I'm sure they're nice people. I mean, but when it comes to who writes your paychecks and which viewpoints are promoted, are seen as acceptable in the Western academies, are seen as compatible with U.S. foreign policy. I mean, that's a different matter. That's a systemic thing.
But so much of current commentary, and has been for a while, actually back to my youth in the Vietnam War, has Orwell has been treated as a kind of a voice against capital. It's been he's called up again and again. The monopoly of the press and that sort of thing, existing with 6 corporations own virtually all the media in America and that sort of thing. And Orwell is cited in many different contexts as being against that. So there seems to be some aspect of Orwell that is anti-capitalist.
Yeah, but and again, I think it's an anti-capitalism that is not threatening to capitalism. And because at the same time you get the anti-capitalism from Orwell, and anybody that buys into that from Orwell is also going to have an anti-communism, because Orwell was very anti-communist. And again, I think these guys, they might very well believe their own writing, and they might think that they're very smart, and that's the reason that they're getting platformed. But if their views were anything else, they would not have a platform, even if they were twice as smart and insightful as they are. But I think, like a lot of people on TV, the talking heads and these people that have been platformed, I think, I'm not sure how conscious they are, how self-conscious they are about why they have their platform. Like, do they really understand that they're telling people, they're saying what the owners of the society want to hear? Or do they genuinely think that, wow, I must be really smart and that's why I'm getting platformed. Different people are probably have a different sort of awareness, but if their opinions were anything other than what they were, they would not have a platform, no matter how smart they are. Is the bottom line. Does that help your question, Dustin? I know you had opened up about where is this divergence, and in the left, you have Chomsky says good things. There's a lot of good work that Chomsky has done, that Hannah Arendt has done, that Orwell has done. They've opened a lot of people's eyes. They're a gateway for a lot of people, but they're also gatekeepers in the sense that they exist to keep us from embracing a complete understanding. I don't know.
And we have to remember that these are not so much individual choices. That when we talk about people in the academia, we have to remember that we're talking about 4 generations, we're talking about 5 generations of bourgeois ideology and anti-communism saturating every aspect of our culture, from the academies to popular culture. So the consciousness is just entirely saturated. And the old adage, someone will not understand something that he's paid to not understand. Mm-hmm. So I think most of the people that work in the Western academias, I think, they do believe what they say. Absolutely. I mean, we encounter them on a daily basis. I mean, whenever I talk to someone, a German or a American, who say that they say they're communist, I'm always like, okay, tell me more. I'm suspicious.
Okay, Dustin, any comment?
Well, so what are some thinkers that are alternatives to this paradigm we're discussing, the false consciousness? Who offers?
You're looking at 2 of them. No, I'm sorry.
I guess you could say
a question.
"quote unquote" canon. Like traditional thinkers that are like sort of sidelined in the sphere of intellectual thinking. Of like, are there any thinkers out there from the past? I mean, you opened up, Carlo, with Cross, and is there some others that are worthy of reading that we haven't mentioned?
Michael Parenti.
Okay.
The Italian Marxist Losurdo, both giants in history, and currently Vijay Prashad is awesome.
Okay.
So historian Jacques Pauwels, we had on the show, he does great history. He doesn't talk too much about political theory, but his history is the fundamental foundation of an accurate political theory. Jacques Pauwels. And we did also touch on Rockhill, Gabriel Rockhill, doing some solid work. Right now, he's doing his critical theory workshop in France, and I'm going to be watching all those presentations. But he's working with Jacques Pauwels and some others doing a critical theory workshop right now in Paris, I believe, through this week and next week. Anyway, so the thing is, these people are never going to be platformed, Dustin. They're never going to be given and if they start to make traction and become viral, so to speak, and really they're going to start getting sidelined from YouTube, and they're going to be taken off of Twitter. I mean, that's just how the system works.
Right.
Right.
Gray Zone. I mean, Bellingcat goes after Gray Zone, I mean,
Gray Zone. Brief break, but we'll be right back.
If you look at the chain of command that's going after Gray Zone now, it's billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And here's
they're getting popularity
here in DC, and he's just living in a regular house. Now, and they're not wealthy, certainly Aaron Mate he's not raking it in. That's amazing. But also it's amazing, and this is probably worthy of discussion. It's amazing that people like Ben Norton and Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal have had such influence. No matter what you think of their ultimate thinking processes, they've had an enormous influence.
We'll come back to that thought right after this wonderfully designed capitalist ad. Thanks. America Open Market, AO Market. The best digital market for humanity is a free, multilingual, borderless market open to international sellers with various languages included. With America Open Market, you may start selling in minutes after filling out the form. Comprehensive dashboard where you understand your sales, orders, and customers is available. You get paid directly, securely, and instantly on the America Open Market. You can sell your house, car, electronic laptop, CD player, boombox, phone, headphones, furniture, and clothing, and anything on AmericaOpenMarket.com where all your sales and customer needs are met. Register as a merchant today. You will not regret becoming a vendor at America Open Market. For further inquiries, contact us at aomarket@gmail.com. AO Market, best digital marketplace for humanity.
Leo, are we anti-market? I think markets have a place, right? We're not anti-market.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a hilarious ad. Of course, we're not anti-market. The true free market can only begin to exist when private ownership no longer dominates it completely. I mean, there is no free market or free competition when it doesn't matter how smart, how innovative, how hardworking you are. The guy that inherited 12 hotels and 300,000 acres of land is going to win against.
Right.
I mean, it's very simple.
Absolutely.
It's very simple.
Like
we want a free market. Yes, absolutely. Just like we want democracy, but not this fake free market that's under capitalism that's dominated by a handful of super rich people. How free can it be?
Right. It's like maybe one of the biggest jokes in the world is Juan Guaido right now in Venezuela. And when I confront people, they go, well, Chavez, he nationalized the oil industry. And before that, it was part of the free market. And I go, well, actually, that's not true. Actually, it was stolen. And if you know anything about the history of the accessing oil in Venezuela, it's just a litany of bribes and theft and murder. That's all it is. And so it's when Chavez takes it back, all he's doing is taking it back from the thieves that took it in the first place. And that goes for the entire world. But would you guys like to shift to China right now? Well, we got about a little less than half hour left.
What specifically, Carlo? It's such a broad topic.
Yeah, why don't you want to do it or not?
Well, yeah, no, we can, but just give us specifically what are we going to discuss? Because China is such a broad topic.
Okay, I was thinking of how the U.S. is nibbling around the edges for decades. You've got Tibet, you've got the Uyghurs, you got Hong Kong, and you have Taiwan, and I just run with that and lay in some comments. Is that specific enough?
The imperialist playbook has stayed the same, has remained the same throughout the entire Cold War, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's exactly the same. I mean, you find some contradiction within their society, within the society that you want to dominate. You find contradictions. You find authentic, often, sparks of discontent. And you pour gasoline on those sparks and make it into a fire. And you turn people who want, reforms of their socialist system into anti-government, agents or forces. And you amplify the problems, and then you use it as a context for any kind of regime change operation.
I found your blog on Falun Gong, very informative. That was a great blog. Everyone should read that. Everyone.
Yeah. Within any society, I keep telling people, over here, we talk about Syria a lot and Venezuela, but in these German leftists, they're the same as American leftists, right? They say, well, Assad is a dictator. He's he's cruel to his own people, blah blah blah. But any cursory, just very basic, there are exponentially more U.S. Americans who want Joe Biden out of office than Syrians who want Assad out of office. I mean, there was an internationally observed election. I mean, international human rights organizations observed the last election in Syria, and Assad got 80%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you think
or something like that.
Do you think people are beginning to make the distinction between, well, Assad was a dictator and he was, and the distinction that has nothing to do with U.S. foreign policy? The U.S. foreign policy makers don't care a rat's rectum about democracy anywhere.
Right.
Anywhere. It's the oil. I mean, and if that didn't become apparent to people after the 2 invasions of Iraq, I don't know how you get through those kind of thick skulls. And I know if you crack those skulls open, if the cops say crack that skull open, there's nothing there. It's just unbelievable to me that people still swallow. You've got this notion, well, he's a dictator, we have to bring him democracy, when in reality all it is a ploy to steal natural resources, and they're doing it right now in a third of the country. And people don't know these simple facts. Billy Bob is more hopeful about the population than I am. Maybe
you have to be, because we have no other choice but to eventually get the working class to wake them up. And right now it seems like an impossible task because it seems like they're dead. But they're just in a coma, and we just got to give them time and keep working on them. There's no other choice. There's really no other option except defeatism. And I have too much hope. And China gives me a reason to hope, because I think China has set a kind of something in motion that is just impossible to stop. There's nothing that can stop what China has set in motion. And as that manifests itself over the next 10, 20 years, it's just, there's a lot of room for optimism. The U.S. citizens and the Western citizens are going to be dragged kicking and screaming into reality. And it's going to be accelerating. But yeah, I share your frustration for sure. So Leo was talking about, exploiting fractures within society. I mean, that's how imperialism works. So it's very interesting that, Falun Gong is a religious cult, and they're adamantly anti-communist. And so they're the darlings of the West. Like, we platform them, we give them, millions of dollars to propagandize, and even terrorism. I mean, they engage in terrorism, and they've been outlawed by China. And then since China outlaws them because they were, essentially a tool of Western, subversion. Now we can attack China for being authoritarianism, for being authoritarian, and for cracking down on religious freedom. So this is just the game that the West, that's how imperialism works. And they've done the same thing country after country after country. We've averaged a regime change a year since 1945. It's less than one. It's not quite one, but if you round up to the nearest whole number, it's one. But you know a lot about that, Carlo. You're an expert on Cold War and the CIA's crimes.
Yeah, I've been around a long time.
That's not what I meant.
Interesting. See, I cut my teeth when I was forced to go to university because I was 1A in the draft, and I fought my draft board for 6 years, but that's another story. But I studied Ezra Pound, the fascist poet Ezra Pound, and much of his cantos, he has what are called the Chinese cantos, and he reprises Chinese history. So I had to read several books on Chinese history as I did my work on him, and it was just famine after famine after famine, and famine seemed to be driving the entire, the Warring States period. It seemed to be driving the whole history of the country. That's gone. Oh my God, that's gone. What an enormous achievement.
Within
Forget
barely a
everything
decade.
else.
Within barely a decade of taking power, famine was
Forget it.
eradicated.
Just forget it. I'll be try to be brief about this because this show only lasts an hour, unfortunately. But when I was a young lad, a young poet, I was invited to a place called the More Fun House East on Porter Street here in Washington, D.C. And that was run by John Pauker, who, along with James Jesus Angleton and Reed Whittemore, had Furioso magazine that published Ezra Pound at the time. And of course, they had CIA connections. James Jesus Angleton was part of the More Fun House East. So Encounter magazine, the Paris Review, all that nonsense. So I'm meeting all these people down there as a young poet, and I'm getting really uncomfortable. Like, whoa. But I'm being promised, like, we'll take you to Europe, and you can read in all these European capitals, especially Eastern European countries. But after a very short period, I smelled a rat, and I backed off, and I think they saw in me that I wasn't material that they could co-opt, maybe just out of ignorance on my part, or I didn't have a kind of patrician background, so that played against it too. But I rubbed elbows with these people, and they're dishonest to the core, and
so you suspected somewhat of a recruiting effort to join their
that's a simple thing. That's why I was sent down there, to go meet John Pauker and to go to these soirees, and so they were working at it then. Anyway, I don't know if that's what that's germane to, but I thought I'd get that out.
About Ezra Pound in relation to sort of our discussion, does in the cantos, does he differentiate culture and politics, or do you have any answer to that, Carlo?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't.
Okay.
At all. I think there's a lot of Confucius in the cantos. I think some scholars go too far, because Pound talked about phanopia, melopia, and logopia being all necessary to make a good poem. So he incorporates all of these elements. But I don't want to get into discussing that. But the short answer is no. Culture and politics for Pound were inextricably linked, and that's why I think he saw some ridiculous hopefulness in Mussolini, because Mussolini came off as a kind of cultured. He was an idiot, but he came off as kind of cultured in that Italian European way. So, but we should probably leave that aside.
But speaking of culture and politics, there's a confusion of culture and politics in the Western left. People, prioritize surface cosmetic phenomenon rather than material reality, right? I mean, just on a very basic level, what does freedom mean? In all of the former Soviet bloc, on average, rent was 5% of your wages. That is freedom. Everyone not having to stress about paying rent, like everyone having enough, being relaxed about their survival, their necessities. That's freedom. That's a fundamental, that's a material, real freedom. But here, in the West, we think freedom is, choosing your lifestyle or whatever. I mean, which is also important, but not as important as food. A gay friend of mine recently said he just said, the right to life, the right to food is not more important than gay rights. But I wanted to say something about the most important, I think, point that the Western working class in the imperial core should understand. I think was very difficult, but it's an easy point, but it's very difficult for people to realize is that their fate is not opposite of the Chinese proletariat of China. Their fate is not opposite of Russia. Their fate is not, or what's good for them. Their interests are not pitted, are not against the colonized world, the regions victimized by imperialism. Their fates are actually entwined, right? When Africa becomes more developed and more rich, when China, when Asia, when South America, Central America becomes more developed and rich, the American workers will benefit because their jobs can no longer be exported overseas, because the Cubans or Venezuelans and Russians and Chinese and Vietnamese their wages are rising. So that's like a fundamental point, I think.
And it's hard for us to conceptualize that because for me, our standard of living is so much higher than what they currently don't enjoy in Africa or Asia. And we kind of, we intuitively just kind of feel like as they get more prosperous, we're going to get less prosperous. That's just kind of the mentality that we've all been ingrained on. And I'm even struggling trying to appreciate what you're saying to be true, just as you're saying it. So that's very interesting. I'm going to have to think about that. But I think China is offering peace through mutual prosperity and development and a raising of living standards around the world. That's kind of the global leadership that China is offering. What's the name of our program today? It's like, are the Asiatic Hordes coming for our freedoms? And when I said freedoms, we used a silly spelling, free with dumb, D-U-M-B, because the idea of freedom, like Leo mentioned earlier, has been weaponized against the working class, and they perceive freedom to be something that it really isn't, or it's definitely not a complete understanding of freedom. But yeah, it's been hijacked. The term freedom and democracy, those have all been hijacked in furtherance of imperialist interests and capitalist class interests.
And imperialism upholds capitalism, right? The exploitation of the global south, the domination of these countries, economies, and governments makes possible the exploitation of German workers, of American workers, of English workers, of French, Italian workers. That makes it possible. So the two are completely entangled, and one is not possible without the other. And so, but people in the West, the Western Marxists, endlessly talk about the labor theory of value, and it's all about bosses and workers, right? It's all about only bosses and workers. And so, like, they fantasize unions. I mean, which are great, which are necessary, right, but
they have a place.
Larger picture of how that's integrated into global imperialism and how it depends on global imperialism, that is completely missing.
There's no clearer example than Africa right now, where China is building. They built the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia. The projects are legend, but all the U.S. offers is AFRICOM, which is as not a developmental project. It's a security project. There's no development into it in all. So that's an enormous difference that should be obvious to everyone. And also, just briefly, the notion that elections have anything to do with democracy. That's where we have Chomsky to thank to a large degree, I think, because he has hammered away at that idea. Well, if you have such admiration for elections, why do you keep overthrowing elected governments? It's very simple in that regard. But I just want to throw that out.
Yeah, Biden's approval rating is something at like 27% or 30% or something like that. I mean, by that measure, or by Americans' logic, China should be sending troops to the U.S. and setting up military
Liberate
bases.
us from the Biden regime, please.
Exactly.
We want these Asiatic hordes to save us.
Yeah, China should be setting up military bases all along the Mexico border, the Canadian border, and and funding extremists, funding the Proud Boys, and funding. So I mean, but this is why China refuses absolutely to engage in any kind of things like this, because the most important thing is to not do what the imperialists do, and to change the world through reshaping global trade.
And then that's a thing that Western fake leftists criticize China about. They criticize China for being principled non-interventionists, and they're like, "What kind of communists are you? You're not trying to overthrow the capitalist government. You're not funding a proletarian revolution in these countries. You're not sending arms to Seattle to overthrow that district that they took over momentarily. So China can do nothing right in the eyes of the fake Western left. And so
sorry, go on.
No, please.
A big reason for that is that the era that we live in, 21st century, is the conditions are the geopolitical conditions are very different from the 20th century, right?
Yeah.
In the 20th century, the Chinese government did assist the South African anti-apartheid movements, and Russia did support even RIF, even these sort of extreme leftist groups in the US, in the West, and of course the Black Panthers had massive support from China and Russia, strategically, materially, but the times that we live in are different. I mean, this age of super imperialism, because they're getting desperate, right? And the U.S. thrives on war. The economy is based on war, basically. And so to fund guerrillas in the Philippines, or to fund leftist groups in other parts of the world, is just calculated to be not a good strategy for the entire world.
Yeah, and I think China's approach is entirely correct and the most productive and the most beneficial to the global working class. I think it would be a losing strategy to do what these Western leftists demand that they do to show their real communist bona fides. It's absurd. And same thing, they want them to, hey, they have, billionaires exist in China. Why don't we, abolish private ownership in China? And that's the Western leftist criticism of China. They haven't abolished private ownership. That would be a disaster for China. Like they would immediately get sanctioned and embargoed. They would get isolated. They would lose trillions of direct capital investment, and that'd be bad for the working class. So China's a real working class government, communist party that's doing its best to identify and pursue the best interests of the working class. And I mean, that's all we ask. That's what we need in our country. Our country is the opposite. It's a government of, by, and for the capitalist class. And it's looking to identify the interests of the capitalist class, and it's pursuing those. They have limitations. They have obstacles to overcome. Public opinion is one of them, but they have tools to deal with that, the propaganda apparatus. I mean,
well, jump in, guys. So as the U.S. becomes destabilized, what's the response of the rest of the world, especially from Russia and China, and Latin America too?
And Africa.
What's it going to be?
Celebration.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Woo!
Well, what if it spills over into those countries? And I have a fear for a number of minority groups, especially African Americans, because a lot of my neighbors are African Americans here, as the U.S. disintegrates, and it's disintegrating far more rapidly than I would have ever expected in the last 40 years or so. And I would like, how do you feel about that? I think it's crumbling before my eyes.
Any other thoughts besides celebration, Leo?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
is there reason to have some uncertainty and fear about what could possibly?
I share the celebration part. Let me say.
Yeah, I mean, the optimism is on a larger scale, right? When we talk about local situations in the West, I mean, of course, there's many apprehensions. There's many. I mean, we can expect economic downturn, if not full-on depression, by the end of this year. We can expect chaos and more conflict. On Reddit, the crazy fucking videos Reddit will get better and more interesting. But yeah. I mean, that's the big question, right? What are Western leftists to do in this situation? revolutionary defeatism. We want the imperialists to lose, but people will suffer. I mean, as the system crumbles and as it's already beginning to.
Also, since you're in Berlin, what's the situation there with the Greens in power and your general impression? I'm just curious.
It's Germany is a satellite state. Germany is a vassal state. Germany is a client state of the U.S. Is a puppet. Just like most of Western Europe or all of Western Europe. I mean, specifically Germany was designed to be the outpost, the projection of U.S. hegemonic power in Western Europe. And so, of course, the politics here are just, it's just liberalism, imperialist liberalism to the core. And the Greens, they're the worst. They voted for the bombing of Yugoslavia. They voted for, every single imperialist war they have been behind. Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, they were just completely, we're in a very, very interesting situation. I think unprecedented, where the progressives who talk woke, environment, blah, 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 are the imperialist warmongers. And some of the only visible anti-imperialism actually is coming from the right, from the cultural right, and as well as other kinds of rights. So it's a very, very interesting situation.
Is it a genuine or false paradox?
What, that you're talking about? Right, anti-imperialism?
That the roles have flipped. That we have blue collar people on Breitbart here, Trump supporters who don't want foreign wars, for example.
Yeah, no, that's not even necessarily a contradiction if we understand the class interests, right?
Right,
exactly. We understand the upper part of capital wants imperialism and total world domination, and the lower stratas of capital want national development, and they want to bring jobs back. They want to end spending so much on imperialism, on war. So yeah, I think it does make sense.
Yeah, it does make its own sense. It sure does. So
yeah, the Greens in Germany, they kind of epitomize the new CIA woke leftism that is not a threat to the ruling establishment. It's not a threat to imperialism, and they speak in paradigms that that are not threatening to the status quo. Kind of like Biden, and then their biggest enemy, the people they demonize the most, are the Le Pens and the Trumps that offer a strategic vision, like a global vision that is different from the liberal capitalist class consensus of globalism. Western Europe aligned, the transatlantic alliance, Western Europe and the U.S. defeating the economic rivals. And so, that's one of the reasons Trump was kicked out, was because, he wanted to be friends with Russia. Well, that wasn't the plan. And so I think their plans got delayed by 4 years, and they were angry and they were not happy. And so they got Trump the hell out of there. They got Biden in, and they implemented what we're seeing right now in Ukraine, which I think was scheduled to start a couple years before it actually did. But
I agree with that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Leo.
I just wanted to say, as we navigate these contradictions, right, anti-imperialism and progressive imperialism, we need to be dialectical about it, right? We need to recognize that as much the anti-imperialism is genuine on the right. These people don't understand class. They would say the globalists are ruining everything, and if it wasn't for the neocons and the globalists, everything would be fine, right? They would say it's the liberals, it's these imperialists that without that faction in the White House, everything will be fine. But they don't see that it's a global system that's been constructed for 100 years, right? That it's predicated on the ownership paradigm, the private ownership and accumulation, and the power structures that arise from the private ownership. And at the same time, just one last thing. At the same time, on the progressives, we shouldn't throw away the social progressive values. That doesn't mean that gay rights are bad. or
Right, right.
or trans rights or whatever. These things are still important, but we need to disentangle that from their imperialist agenda, and we need to recognize how it's been weaponized, how it's been used. Feminism, all of these progressive social values have been weaponized against anti-imperialist countries.
Yes.
So it's time for us to close. We've reached our hour. So thanks for watching the Foreign Policy Review. Please subscribe to our channel, the New York Parrot. And thanks to our commentators today. We had two commenting, some very intelligent comments on the show today. So thank you so much for contributing to our show and to the greatness that is the Foreign Policy Review. And remember to take a look at America Open Market at AmericaOpenMarket.com. Sorry about that. A little bit of a blurb in my speech. Thank you for watching today. Subscribe to the channel, Foreign Policy Review, and have an excellent day.